start. Open up to the book of Acts. We'll be in chapter 24 this morning. There's Bibles around you. If you don't have a Bible, Acts is about, 3/4 of the way to the right. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and my sweet friend. Thank you so much, sister. Thank you. You realize you're in the seat this morning over there in the corner, right? Yeah. That a baby. Beverly's doing, for a person hit by a bus, she's doing fantastic, I think is the way to say it. That woman is just incredible. Marian's shaking her head. You're just in there, she's just got the God, man. She's just got this strength and humility and sense of God next to her, and it's just a tremendous thing to see. So, and it's been tough for a bunch of us that haven't been able to go see her over the last 4 or 5 days because of headaches and head trauma and stuff. But she's kind of coming out of that a little bit, so you can't go back to kind of visit if you call her. So keep praying for Beverly, and we're going to throw a big party, but she's sitting back in that corner seat, right? Acts chapter 24. Let's start by just kind of doing a review, not because I doubt your attendance record, but because I doubt your focus. You recall Paul was just on his 3rd missionary journey. He was out and about, and Jesus shows up literally in the evening in a vision. And what he tells Paul is, I want you to go back to Jerusalem. It just so happens that he has him go back for this great festival of Shavuot, one of the 3 big harvest festivals, the grain festival, the last 50 days. And he tells him, you're going to go there. It's going to be not very fun. But don't worry, I'm going to use that to slingshot you back out even farther than you've ever been. You're going to go to Rome. You're going to make it. Just trust me. And in Paul's mind, we'll find out even farther than that, west to Spain. And there are different views about that. His friends, when he lands on the coast in Tyre and Sidon, these little house churches, the Spirit of God has also told them Paul's going to suffer when he gets there. They extrapolate from that, unfortunately, that they do not want Paul then to go. The Spirit simply told them, your friend is going to suffer when he gets there. And they do what Jeff Clipness has categorized for me. They sympathize rather than empathize. They simply stay outside of Paul, and they are worried about Paul, and because they don't enter into Paul's situation, they don't place themselves where Paul is, they don't empathize, they sympathize, they then become worried about themselves and how bad they're going to feel when this happens to Paul, and they try to steer Paul from going. And Paul politely tells them to close their mouth and stop getting him to not follow God. And part of our walk with Jesus, carrying our cross, is that we will suffer on behalf of the kingdom of God. So Paul does get to Jerusalem. He's greeted by James, the brother of Jesus, the head of the Jerusalem church and the church. And they, too, know that he is not real popular, and so they warn him, this is not going to be a very good Shavuot for you. But we have an idea. What we think you should do is we think you should prove to the Jewish people in the city how pious you are by purifying yourself probably because you've been hanging around with Gentiles. So we need you to spend 7 days at the temple making sacrifices and purifying yourself. And on top of that, we've got some dudes that don't have any money. They need to be purified. And they're coming out of their Nazirite vow. So we want you to pay for them. And then everybody will see how pious you are, and they'll back off of you. He does that whole week of purification, and it doesn't help a lick. And a near mob scene starts taking place. They grab Paul, and they're going to basically destroy him in the temple. The Romans see him. The Roman cohort is up in the Antonia fortress. They look down into the Temple Mount. They see this near riot going on during Shavuot. They rush down. They grab Paul to save his life. They're literally huddled around him as people are trying to grab and paw at him. They're taking him back to the Antonia fortress. As they get to the steps to go up, Paul says to them, give me a second. Would you mind if I just say a couple words to my Jewish comrades who are trying to kill me, by the way? The Roman commander thinking, you are just an idiot. Sure, go ahead and do it. So Paul turns to the Jewish audience, and he gives this eloquent defense speech. He just explains his commitment to God, what this is all about, and it's all going swimmingly until the very end when Paul tells them, and oh, by the way, the calling I have on my life was the original call of Abraham. I am called now not just to minister to Jews, but I am called by Messiah himself to go out and reach out to the Gentiles. If that statement doesn't go well, they try to grab him again. The Roman cohort takes him up, and they chain him up, and they're going to try to scourge him. Just before they scourge him, Paul, bound and chained around this post, says, Can I just tell you one more quick item? I'm a Roman citizen. They freak out because you can't just whip a Roman citizen without a trial. And so the whole thing just gets screeched to a halt. The commander doesn't know what to do. He finally decides, I'll tell you what, let's just see if we can work this out in a friendly way. The next morning he takes Paul back down to the Sanhedrin, this ruling elite of the Jewish people, made up of two different groups, and we'll talk about them again, the Sadducees and the Pharisees. And he says, you guys talk it out. So the Romans are standing in the back, and they're waiting, and they're going to watch this happen. And there's this lovely little exchange between Paul and the high priest. And Paul, again, gives this deep explanation. And what Paul does is he shifts this whole thing away from, look, you're making these silly accusations about whether or not I brought a Gentile up to the Temple Mount and brought him inside the inner court. I, of course, didn't do that, but that's not the issue. What's really at issue here is whether or not there's a resurrection. Now, Paul knows that this group is split between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. The Pharisees, of which Paul is a Pharisee, believe in a resurrection. We'll talk about that further. We talked about it last week. The Sadducees do not. We don't be Westerners. When we hear the word resurrection, all we think about is Jesus. And we think there's nobility to that. And Jesus would look at us and go, darn it, I wish you're missing it. Jesus was resurrected. That we know. And that we rely on as followers of Jesus. That he was killed, that he was raised 3 days later to new life, that he conquered death, that he was a sacrifice for our sin, that if we now bow our knee to Jesus as our Savior and Lord, he will wash us clean. But this is where we Westerners jump off the bus, and it's so unfortunate. Jesus is not just resurrected. Jesus, and I've said this many times here, is the first of the resurrection. So what Jesus is doing is actually inaugurating the resurrection. He is beginning the new creation of God, of which now you and I are a part. So when we say to God, I give up on trying on this on my own, I give my life to you, come into me, dwell with me, I want to live eternally with you. When we say this to God, we are resurrected. Amen? We are raised anew. So this idea of resurrection to a Jewish person is not just about Messiah coming back. It's about God raising all of life back to its proper place. So Paul wants to make the main point, to borrow a phrase, and he says, this is really about the resurrection of the dead. The Sanhedrin splits right down the middle. The Pharisees say, yeah, right on, Paul, we're with you. The Sadducees say, boy, now we really want to kill you because we don't even believe in a resurrection. This thing gets ugly all over again. The Roman commander finds out they're going to try to assassinate Paul. In the middle of the night, he takes half his cohort and he escorts Paul 70 miles to the coast of the capital of Rome and Judea called Caesarea. And here we find our story this morning. Paul locked up in prison at the Praetorian in Caesarea on the coast, 70 miles from Jerusalem. So it's a little bit of out of the frying pan into the fire. He escapes death at the hands of these Jewish Sadducees, but he's now in deep legal doo-doo with the Romans and locked up. And Paul finds himself before the highest Roman court in all of Judea, before Governor Felix. I shared this quote with you last week from Tacitus, the secular historian. He described Governor Felix, the Roman governor, as practicing every form of cruelty and lust, wielding the power of a king with all the instincts of a slave. You recall his background. He was a slave. His brother got him out of slavery, got him promoted through the Roman ranks. So he's a weird kind of twist. He's a guy that started at the bottom and worked his way up, but not at his own hands. He worked his way up at the hands of his brother. So now we have Paul locked up in the Praetorium, and he's going to make a defense. And he's got, at least that I can find, 3 goals. One of them is he wants to obviously prove that he's innocent. That's clear before the Romans. He wants to get to Rome. So he wants to get out of this imprisonment to go on. But more than that, because we know Paul, he gets to and wants to continue to make a defense about why Jesus is the Messiah and this new way called Christianity for his Jewish comrades. And as a weird twist, he will get to share Messiah with this Roman twisted governor Felix and his wife Drusilla, who will be introduced shortly. It reminds me of the prophecy Jesus gave not long before this in Luke chapter 21, when Jesus said this, But before all these things they will lay their hands on you, and they will persecute you. He's speaking to his disciples, delivering you to the synagogues and prisons, bring you before kings and governors for my sake. It will lead to an opportunity for your testimony. Jesus was letting them know, look, this is life walking with me. So it may look bad, and it may be something that Satan is even involved in, but I promise you I will be present and I will bring light to a dark situation every time. So here Paul finds himself before the governor himself, listening to the words of Jesus in his own mind, saying, wow, I've heard this before. This is why we read the scriptures. So during all this, remember, Paul is expecting, because Jesus told him so, I'm going to Rome. But it doesn't look like it when we read this chapter. Verse 1 in chapter 24. After 5 days, the high priest Ananias came down with some elders, with an attorney named Tertullus, and they brought charges to the governor against Paul. So Paul's been locked in the Praetorium for 5 days. This Felix guy, we know, does not like Jewish people. So the idea that the Jewish Sanhedrin is going to come personally to meet with Felix is not necessarily a grand idea. And there's 2 sides to this, right? On the one side, Paul's Roman. He's a Roman citizen. So he will receive Roman prejudice. So there's a good side to the coin. He automatically has the upper hand against these Sadducees. The flip side is, these Sadducees are wealthy. The priesthood was extremely wealthy. If you go to Jerusalem today, you're actually able to walk through the ruins of the priestly homes underneath the city. They were lavish, which was part of the problem God had with them. This is part of the reason Jesus was so harsh with the priests. They were just spending everybody's money on themselves. It was just a brutal deal. So they have money. And as Derek will tell you in court, and as we've seen in TV, when you have money, you get to hire a really good attorney. And so this Tertullus comes from wealth. And so here Paul is defending himself on the flip side against a very, very powerful, incredible source in this lawyer. Verse 2. After Paul had been summoned, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying to the governor, listen to this, sir, in these verses. Since we have, through you, Felix, attained much peace, and since by your providence reforms are being carried out for this nation, we acknowledge this in every way and in every place, most excellent Felix, with all thankfulness, but that I may not weary you any further, too late, I beg you to grant us, by your kindness, a brief hearing. By the way, this Felix, in history, is known as the most ruthless Roman governor. The most ruthless Roman governor leading up to the Jewish revolt and Roman war against the Jews in AD 66. He hated the Jews. He is known in history for his brutal suppression of the Jews and the Gentiles. So this is the definition of sucking up. If you didn't know what sucking up is, this is it. Verse 5. For we have found this man, meaning Paul, to be a real pest. This is the word for disease or plague, by the way. So he's not just a problem in and of himself. This is an insurrection word. He is causing the downfall of Rome, disease, plague word. And a fellow who stirs up dissension, the same word Luke used for Barabbas, the guy that was swapped for Jesus, by the way. among all the Jews throughout the world. So this guy is a national, international problem for Rome, he's saying. And he's a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. This ringleader is a quasi-military term, by the way. And he even tried to desecrate the temple, and then we arrested him. We wanted to judge him according to our own Torah. But Lysias, the commander, came along and with much violence took him out of our hands, ordering his accusers to come before you. By examining him yourself concerning all these matters, you will be able to ascertain the things which we accuse him. The Jews also joined in the attack, asserting that these things were so. Verse 10. When the governor had nodded for him to speak, Paul responded. So Paul began to give a defense for himself. And this is how he starts. Knowing that for many years you have been a judge to this nation, Felix, I cheerfully make my defense. Since you can take note of the fact that no more than 12 days ago I went to Jerusalem to worship. Neither in the temple, nor in the synagogues, nor in the city itself did they find me carrying on a discussion with anyone or causing a riot. Nor can they prove the charges of which you now accuse me. The first thing Paul does is, in his defense is he tells them, first of all, I'm not just a Jew, I'm a pious Jew. And we know that I'm a pious Jew because I've been so careful with my treatment of the temple. His whole point of being at the temple was actually to not defile it by actually going through a purification process. And this is super important for him to show. And there's this weird deal where Paul says, it's been 12 days, and scholars don't know what this is. It either means that Paul has only been back in the city for 12 days, or it means after the 7 days of purification, it was only 12 days. So his reference is either 12 to 19 days. It's somewhere in there. The reason Paul is saying this is it's really recent. And it's been so recent, you should easily be able to find a reliable witness to prove what I've done wrong. And where are they? Less than 3 weeks, Paul is saying, possibly less than 2 weeks, and you can't find a single witness. So the first thing he does is he says, look, I'm an extremely pious Jew. I would never defile the temple. And on top of that, he's now questioning the reliability of his accusers. Let's read on, verse 14. But this I do admit to you. So here's his confession now. The charges of which they now accuse, this is what I admit to you. That according to the way, this is Christianity, which they call a sect. By the way, it's not wrong to have it. The Pharisees were a sect. The Sadducees were a sect. But they're referring to Paul as being a part of a sect, this Christianity, that's actually an insurrectionist sect that will topple Rome. I do serve the God of our fathers, believing everything that is in accordance with the Torah and is written in the prophets, having a hope in God which these men cherish themselves, that there will certainly be, now he's going to keep sticking to the main point, there will certainly be a resurrection of both the righteous and the wicked. In view of this, I also do my best to maintain always a blameless conscience before God and before men. His confession is not to a crime. His confession is that he is in line with his forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and all the prophets. That his confession is he also follows this God of Israel and worships him. What Paul is telling him is, look, what I'm involved in is not some odd hobby. I'm not following some nut job around in the desert. I'm following the literal fulfillment of all of the Old Testament and Messiah. And most likely, if not all of this delegation of Jews that came to accuse him are Sadducees. That's why they're there. You remember, in Jerusalem, the Pharisees were supporting Paul when he made the statement about the resurrection. And he's back to this point that Paul says, here's my crime. I believe in the resurrection of the righteous and the wicked. Again, retrain your mind. He is not just talking about the resurrection of Messiah. What he is talking about is the ancient belief that a Jew would have. That first of all, the God of Abraham is the judge of everything. And this judge of the whole earth, fortunately, is pure and just and fair and good. And this judge, who, by the way, is also the original creator, so he's the only one that has the right to judge because he's the one that built the whole thing, has a commitment to put this mess back into order. And so the resurrection of the righteous and the wicked to a Jew in this time, and what Paul is saying, is that God, the creator and judge, who, by the way, is Jesus. Jesus is the one we learn that actually spoke creation into being in Genesis, not the Father, by the way. And he's also the one who will sit on the throne in judgment, not out of just fear and frightening, ability, but to actually restore everything. This is the goal of Jesus, to actually put life back together again. This is Israel's great hope. And Paul wants to make sure they know it's here, and you're wasting your time not enjoying it. You're missing God, his thumbprint, putting life back together. It's spoken of all over the Old Testament. I love what Psalm 96, verse 10 through 13 says. Say among the nations, the Lord reigns. Indeed, the world is firmly established. It will not be moved. He will judge. There's your resurrection word. He will judge the peoples with equity. It means he's fair. Let the heavens be glad and let the earth rejoice. Let the sea roar and all it contains. Let the fields exult and all that is in it. Then all the trees of the forest will sing for joy before the Lord, for he is coming. He is coming to judge the earth in fairness and rightness and goodness. He will judge the world in righteousness and the people in faithfulness. By the way, and this is what we've been saying the last few weeks, because it's chilling to me to watch Paul, how calm he is. I love what he says to Governor Felix. I cheerfully will make my defense before you. Who says that? He's not calm, I don't think, because he just knows this Roman law system is just so fair. Derek was a DA for a long time. He switched over now as a defense attorney, and it's fascinating, and I've had the privilege for 20 years to listen to stories. Derek would never say to you, our system is like the perfection of fairness in a million years. And he's really seen that now that he's been on the defense side. It's a good system, I think you would say. I don't know that there's much better system that, people can figure out, but it's certainly flawed to the gills, right? This is not what Paul is relying on. He's also not relying internally on himself. I'm a Roman citizen. I'm safe. This is all going to work out for me. That is not what wires this guy to his calmness. He knows to his core, God created me and he's my judge. So it's on his shoulders, not mine. So I'm his vessel. I will stand here and I will watch even in the worst situation to see what he might redeem through me in this situation. Again, the gospel, the story of God that we're looking at this morning it's about the pursuit of God on behalf of mankind to make things right again. But do not expect a smooth ride. We're a little lulled here. Brian and I always laugh about it. You can tell where the money is because it goes with the politicians. There is not a smoother piece of highway, and you all know what I'm going to say, from Livorno to Sycamore. And then it stops, by the way. It's just the wealthy road. It's like butter. You can't feel. Have you ever noticed this? It's like just creamy butter. Right? This is not life. Life is really more like a Jeep ride on volcanic rock. It's bumpy. So we belong to this God who's creator and this good judge who's committed to putting things right, but it is not smooth for us while he does it. Think about the power of God, the Spirit of Jesus living inside you if you've given your life to him, actually flowing through you onto humanity. That's exhausting. Think about, as you walk around in life, the darkness that God is overturning. Not just overturning, but he's overturning it actually through us. I was talking to a couple, and I won't say their names just to make sure there's anonymity, but we had lunch last Sunday with some close friends of ours from church. And they were relating to us that they had this friend, and the wife, our friend, kept emailing her and texting her, and she just fell off the face of the earth. She wouldn't respond to her texts or phone calls or emails, just fell off the earth. This is never good, right? This is kind of what people do when life turns ugly. They just go internal. They pull back from community. And our friend just kept reaching out to her. They go for a walk last week. Coincidence, they ran into her. She just dumped her failed marriage on them, just the junk going on. The three of them just sat there and just bawled on the Iron Horse Trail. That is what it means to allow the Spirit of God's power to overturn darkness to us. And they were in tears as they were telling us the story at lunch a couple days later. It's painful. When I shared that story with my wife and I just a couple weeks ago, at a local restaurant for breakfast, the waitress sits down, tells us, her boyfriend just got shot a week and a half earlier over a drug-related deal. I mean, it was painful. My wife, when we got done with her, talking with her, after 10 minutes, I shared this. We were leaving. She couldn't leave the restaurant. She was so in agony over this poor girl, she had to go hug her one more time. You know this feeling. This is the Spirit of Jesus flowing through us. It's exhausting. It's painful, isn't it? When you empathize, when you enter into the pain of humanity on behalf of Jesus, with Jesus, and allow Jesus then to touch and heal and comfort, we just are available through that process. Marriage is broken, kids falling apart, right? Loss of job, just junk. A woman run over by a bus, to borrow a recent story, right? And we stand next to that. It's painful. And yet we know, like Paul, God, the judge, is making things right and will. Verse 17. Now after several years, Paul's going to continue. I came to bring alms. So remember, he brought all his money back to help the starving Jews in Jerusalem. This is going to come up later, by the way. To my nation, and to present offerings in which they found me occupied in the temple, having been purified without any crowd or uproar. But there were some Jews from Asia, these diaspora Jews, that caused trouble, who ought to have been present before you. They should be here right now and to make accusation, if they should have anything against me. Or else at least these men themselves that are standing here should tell you what misdeed they found when I stood before the Sanhedrin. Other than for this one statement which I shouted out while standing among them, for the resurrection of the dead I am on trial before you today. Again, this is the issue for Paul. Will God raise the dead? Will God turn the chair back upright? Will God work through darkness to make life out of it? And he keeps going back to this over and over. By the way, in Roman law, to make an accusation against somebody and then to pull that accusation back was a giant no-no. So to accuse Paul and then to not show up is a really, really horrible thing in their Roman system. Verse 22, but Felix, having a more exact knowledge of the way, so he knows a lot about Christianity, put them off, saying, when Lysias the commander comes down, I will decide your case. Felix wants no part of this whole deal. He is Pontius Pilate on steroids. And Luke does not tell us how this guy came to know about Christianity. But you can tell how significant Christianity has become because he knows all about it, even though he's a Roman in this place. And I love what Tom Wright, he's to me the theologian of our generation. N.T. Wright is just masterful, this bishop in England. He had this to say, Janie, I'm sure you read this. he refers to Governor Felix as the drain. It's just a great term. He calls him the drain. He's a guy who was a slave for heaven's sake and doesn't remember anywhere that he came from. He doesn't have any connection to how he got where he got, that he deserves none of it. So he's entitled. He's just this. He's not grateful. He's completely entitled. He takes the blessings he has and convinces himself he deserves all of them and more. Everything this Governor Felix does has the appearance of learning and gaining knowledge and wisdom, and he's just draining life from everybody around him. I know you know people like this. I know you've had conversations like this. Real relationship is that which gives life. Jeff and I went pig hunting for 2 days this week. When I got out of the car, I just felt like, oh, wow, that was great. And it wasn't the hunt. It was just, when you hang around with Clippus, he's life-giving. Brian and I, we try to get to lunch together 3 or 4 days a week. When I get out of the car, it's like, wow, Brian is life-giving. When our dudes, when we sit down on Tuesday, you leave that lunch, you feel like you have more life given to you. Felix is not a man, he's a boy. He doesn't solve problems, he creates them. And when you tell him how to solve a problem, he wants no part of it, which is why you have to tell him the solution over and over and over and over. He's a drain on everybody. So what does a drain do? He slows everything down because he's not there to solve anything. Look at verse 23. Then the drain gave orders to the centurion for him to be kept in custody, and yet have some freedom, and not to present any of his friends from ministering to him. Again, this is where you can always look at life in two ways. Total darkness, nothing's going right, or I bet you if I look hard enough, I can find God's fingerprints. When Jeff and I had a really successful hunt on Tuesday afternoon. I mean, I got out of the truck and in 15 minutes I had a dead pig on the ground. It was the greatest. That for the rest of you, that's a good thing, by the way. And then a couple hours later, Jeff shot his. We had 2 bigs. Well, I had extra money and an extra tag. I asked the guy, "Can we hunt in the morning still?" Right? Well, I ended up shooting a second one, and I missed her vitals by about 3 or 4 inches, so it's not good. A little too low, and I felt it when I released. It had just rained. And if you've never hunted, and maybe you've seen this on TV, when you're stalking, when you're blood trailing an animal, not to be too gross, it's a science. It's Daniel Boonish. And the way you do it is, he'll find a little spot, and then I'll stand by it, and then he'll look for the next one. We couldn't find anything, because I didn't hit it well. So this guy who's been guiding for 20 years, he says to me, get down, get down. So I get down like this. He goes, you're not low enough. Get down lower. So I'm on all fours. He said, you have to get down at the same level. And I'm looking literally in a forest of down leaves, all soaking wet, with red weeds, by the way, and red leaves for a drop of blood the size of a pea. Unsuccessful. And about 15 feet out, you go, all right, I'm here, Doug, I found one. And I get there and he'd be showing me, I go, I don't see it. I don't see it. You know, after a while, I just pretend. Got it. I'm all over it. I saw the same one. This is what looking for the fingerprints of God is like. We have to train ourselves. We have to get down on the ground. And in these verses, we already see it. First of all, Paul's assigned to the centurion. He's not assigned to some schleppy, low-ranking soldier that's going to mistreat him. He's assigned to the manager of all these soldiers. You can see God working through this. And I don't think Felix does this because Felix is nice. I think he's just pacifying. He's just keeping out of trouble. God can work with that. It also says he gave him some freedom. Paul's not chained up. He's not locked in a room. He actually, and I'm not sure how much, he actually can move around a bit. On top of that, he says, I want his friends and family to have full access to him. So not only, by the way, does Paul get to actually have the comforts of what his friends can bring him, you know, blanket, food, these types of things. Paul now gets pen, paper. Remember, Paul's not just an evangelist, right? He's also a pastor. So Paul now gets to write to churches and to Christian brothers and sisters to encourage them. Many scholars believe that several of the New Testament books were written in this period of time when he was locked in jail. Thumbprint, thumbprint, thumbprint. Look for it, and you'll find it. Verse 24. But some days later, Felix arrived with Drusilla, his wife, who was a Jewess. So she's Jewish. He's not. He's a Roman. And sent for Paul and heard him speak. So now the Sanhedrin is left. Now the trial is quieted down. Now it's just grilled cheese sandwiches and coffee and a conversation. And they'll speak with him about his faith in Messiah Jesus. But as he was discussing, this is Paul, righteousness and self-control and the judgment to come, Governor Felix became frightened and said, "Go away for the present. And when I find some time, dream, I will summon you." Drusilla was previously married to a guy named Azizus. He was the king of Emesa. The Drain liked her, and he took her as his wife. She is also the daughter, the youngest daughter of Herod the First. Do you remember Herod the First from Acts chapter 12? He's the one that had James, the brother of John, killed and then locked Peter up to kill him next. He hated Christianity, her father did. Her brother, that Brian will speak of, I think, in detail in 2 weeks, is Herod Agrippa II, kind of the Jewish puppet king that's been placed over them. So this is a weird twist of people before him. This Roman drain, who knows a lot about Christianity, who basically caused a woman, a Jewish woman, to commit adultery because he wanted her, because he's entitled. So he took her. Now her, potentially loaded down with guilt and shame over her own life choices, stands before a prophet of God. So the formal trial now does not give Paul the ability to speak about Jesus directly. And it's so cool to me, Paul doesn't force the door open. If God doesn't give us the chance to say certain things, we don't do it. But now Felix is giving him the opportunity in private. And we can't tell if this Felix guy, if this is genuine interest, or this is simply the Drain amusing himself all over again. I love the quote about the gospel. You may have heard this. The gospel is designed to comfort the disturbed and disturb the comforted. Isn't it fascinating that Paul gets around the Drain who stole another man's wife and he speaks about self-control? And big shock, the guy gets frightened when he hears about what God is like, the righteous judge. And he's done talking to Paul and sends him back to his room. I know we have these experiences too. We'll be having a conversation with somebody. It's moving. You can feel their heart. It's almost like this flower. It's opening up. You can feel their soul open up. And all of a sudden, you strike a chord in the conversation, and the door slams shut. And you kind of like, what was that? The conversation is done. This is exactly what Paul's experiencing. Verse 26. At the same time, too, he was hoping that money would be given him by Paul. So he knows Paul brought a ton of money back for the starving Jews, and he's thinking, this guy's got actually huge purse strings. Maybe I can extort a little money out of him. The Drain. Therefore, he also used to send him for him quite often and converse with him. What a mixture this dude is, isn't he? Felix is so divided. He looks like he's got maybe some spiritual hunger, but he's so locked on himself. And his interests are so self-oriented he can't hear when he's spoken to. By the way, bribing a Roman official was totally illegal, just like it would be in this country, and it happened all the time. It was extremely common. This guy knows he has the money, and so he's doing his best to just keep talking to Paul, and keep him strung along to see if Paul will open up his purse strings. This conversation with Governor Felix and his Jewish wife Drusilla goes on for over 2 years. Verse 27. But after 2 years had passed, Governor Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, and wishing to do the Jews a favor, Felix left Paul in prison. Just a bit of history before we kind of close up. There's a couple schools of thought on this. Most people believe this is around 58 AD. They know this from coins that they found in history. And the important part about dating this is that there was a massive piece of violence that broke out between the Jews and the Gentiles, the Jews and the Romans. Felix the governor sides with the Gentiles against the Jews. The Jews get really upset. They send a delegation to Rome to tattle on Governor Felix and tell him what a horrible job he's doing running Judea. Shortly after this scene, he's removed from office because he's not managing well. This is why he left Paul in prison, because he's just trying to pacify everybody. And eventually, this guy named Festus, that we know very little about, takes over as governor. Josephus spoke of Festus when he said he captured large numbers of the brigands and put not a few of them to death. I want to close with just a couple quick thoughts. And they're not new thoughts, they're old thoughts. Really old thoughts, actually, but even covered already this morning. And the first one is this. Again, I want to keep being mesmerized by Paul's kingdom perspective. In these brutal times like Paul is in, and what he's going through, if we're just inward focused, if we take the eyes of our soul and all we see is this, you'll never, ever see the drop that God has placed in front of you. See, this is what Bob the guide was trying to tell me. Doug, you're not going to see it up there. See, I was so focused on, I was so bothered by it the whole time. I'm thinking, how did I miss that thing from 30 yards? I mean, I've been practicing, and how did I do that? I thought about it, what did I do wrong? You're just beating yourself up. And the guy's looking at me saying, you're focused on the wrong thing. Get on your hands and knees and look for the bloodstain. But when we're like this, when we go to, why me? When we go to feeling sorry for ourselves, when we go to, I know you've never said this, but I'm not getting a fair shake in life. As if this is the place of fair shakeness, by the way. Or, this is my favorite, we act shocked when life turns ugly. Like every time the ugly hits, we're like, wow, I didn't see that coming. We've been fooled by the smooth road right out here. We're in a dark place. I may have shared this. I hope it's okay to share. When I was going through this sermon this morning, you came to my mind. And if you don't know their story, you need to have them over for dinner, and they'll tell you their story. They've had 5 kids. 4 of them passed away after they held them in their arms because they had trouble carrying boys. Michael, Aaron, Nathan, David, Stephen. Just look at their license plate. Look at their email addresses, right? Or go in their house. They've lost 4 boys in their arms. And maybe 3 years ago, I'm guessing, your brother committed suicide. Roughly. So Mike shares this with the church. The church is like, oh. So we're walking out to the parking lot. And you probably don't remember this because you've had a million of these, but I've never forgotten it. And Rob Reed, our dear brother who was here for a long time, Rob Reed and I chased Mike down. You don't even know why you're chasing people down in this moment. You just want to be near them and comfort, but you don't know what to say. And so we both chased Mike down and just stood there. And Rob, who's a dear dude, just kept saying to Mike, of all the people I know that don't deserve this, you're it. I mean, that's a sentence that makes sense to me, right? When I compare you to the rest of the people in life, you've gone through so much more suffering than anyone I know. Of all the people I know, you're the one that should not have had this. And you know what Mike said? I've never forgotten this. No one will escape this place without suffering. And he didn't say it like, poor me. It wasn't, my life's unfair. Why does God not care about me? He said it that way because he knows this is a dark, fallen world that God is redeeming. One life at a time. If we're just inward focused about our own preservation, we will risk seeing the hand of God. And by the way, God's going to move and redeem whether you see it or not. Amen? The only difference is you don't get to watch it. And so you'll be mired in a lack of hope. You'll be mired in just blackness. When you go to that hospital room in Beverly, this is not what you find. You don't find, why did God do this? Like God was driving the bus, right? She got run over, and she can't even tell you how, and she was alert and awake the entire time, before, during, and after. Doesn't know where it came from. It's a dark, dark place for her. And then God crawled in bed with her in that hospital room. He's been there ever since, redeeming, speaking, sharing. I've been in there when people come in, she brings people in, and she just looks, she listens. It was great. This nurse psychiatrist came in, right? He had the answers to life. And as you listen to him, bless his heart, it was just kind of silly. Because we have the scriptures of God to look at, the wisdom, and she treated him with just dignity and honor and listening and moving into him. And, just not overbearing. It was so beautiful to watch. Paul is potentially the greatest witness to the gospel of God that we have ever seen in history. He's been on 3 major missionary journeys, establishing the church across the entire Roman Empire. And God has already made it clear to this dude that he's going to go on to Rome and, in his mind, on to Spain. And here he is, rotting in jail. But Paul would never say that. Paul would never say that. We might say Paul's having a bad day. He's having a bad week. He's having a bad 2 years. Paul would never say that. He'd say, I'm having a really hard day, but wow, I'm not going to miss God. Because that's where I will find life and encouragement and reality in what God does. And here he has 2 people coming to him. And again, there's 2 ways to look at this. You can think, what a waste of this guy's talents. He locked Doug up, and he only gets to talk to two people for 2 years ago. That kind of makes sense, That's about his max. Not Paul. Paul would never say that. Are you kidding me? I get to watch God trying to work these 2 people's lives back to him. And one of them's a total dream, and the other one's a guilty, shameful mess. And oh, by the way, wow, I have a pen and paper. Maybe God will do something with this pen and paper that we now call part of the New Testament. God, not for a moment, feels that this is a waste of time. Or he would let Paul out. And I'm not saying that God put Paul into the prison, but he sure as heck could let him out if he wanted to. We watched God have to wake Paul up in the middle of the night on multiple occasions because he said, okay, drop your chains off. I made the guard go away and fall asleep. I've opened the doors. When God wants him out, he gets him out. He doesn't want him out. If we're in a situation and it's not freeing up, then just stay there. And get on your hands and knees before God and look for the small drop of the blood of Jesus before you so that you realize he's still there. And just keep looking. And allow your friends to come around you in that dark time and remind you, you know what? You stay there. I'll go 15 in front. I'll find the fingerprint for you. That's what we do for each other. The second thought, and we'll close on this, and it's an obvious thought, but I think worth remembering. Ultimately, people make up their own mind about Jesus, just like we had to. And we put all this pressure on ourselves. We need to know the story of God. We need to stand ready with an answer. And this is why we spend so much time learning the story, not only so that it elevates our life so we see how faithful God is, but that when someone outside there asks us a question, we might have an answer to that question. So we study it for all those reasons, right? But not to put pressure on ourselves that I've got to know exactly what to say. And we've all done this. You have this conversation with somebody that does not follow Jesus and you don't know what to say, they ask you hard questions, you babble out some nonsense, and you walk away saying, oh, I blew that. As if God is not capable of repairing all that. This is Paul, people, and he can't convince Felix and Drusilla to bow before Jesus. If he can't, then we're not either. God does the convincing. We just love and love and love. We go to the same restaurant and we just visit and over-tip. and treat with dignity and look people in the eye, and eventually the ugly hits them too. And you know where they go? They go to the two firemen who never stuffed the gospel down their throat, who sat there year after year, day after day, loving, loving, loving. And then their marriage falls apart. And it's always these two firemen, Doug and Craig, they go to, because they know their life's different. We just love and listen. God convinces. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this keen example for us in Paul. I just can't quite get my noodle wrapped around this guy the longer I read about it. Boy, is he convinced of something. Boy, has someone done something for him. Father, we drop to our knees and our hands. In desperation, we look and watch and listen for your still small voice, for your movement in a dark and ugly world. We thank you that you created it and you're the judge over it, fair and good and righteous, putting back what we broke. We trust you, we look to you, we love you, and we thank you that you have broad, broad shoulders. We lower ours in humility. In Jesus'